Plaintiff and the defense have an equal amount of time to do their closing arguments. The plaintiff is entitled to divide their time between an opening argument and a rebuttal. So is the plaintiff ready?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, you may proceed.
May it please the court. Counsel, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. In a few minutes, you're going to go back into the jury deliberation room, and each of you will have 3 jobs. The first job is to answer the questions on the verdict. The second job is to make sure that everyone in the jury carefully follows the law that the judge has just given to you. And the third job is before you answer any of the questions on the verdict form, you need to explain to each other how and why you feel about the answer and what that answer should be. All right? So for the next 20 minutes or so, I'm going to share with you some ways to help you do this. And one of the things that's going to come up probably is, hey, this is a situation in which there's no property damage. And it's important that you remind each other that injuries and property damages are totally separate things. Just because a car is not damaged does not mean that the occupants are not. They don't go together. And it's very important. Remind each other about what Dr. Fisher said. He said when you looked at the photographs, you could tell that the cars could have collided at a speed of up to 8.5 miles per hour. And that was 6,000 pounds of energy in 1/10 of a second. So if that issue comes up, just share with each other, these are some of the things to consider. Another thing that you might want to consider and come up is minor exacerbations of previous injuries. And if we look at the jury instructions about aggravation of pre-existing injuries, which you guys have just heard and read, remember that the law is quite clear that the law says that you take a person as you find them. You know, I think Dr. Foley said, you know, if you had a 12-year-old kid and a 40-year-old woman in a car and they both get hit at the same time, the kid, you know, kind of shrugs off the neck pain in a few weeks, but the mom has long-term problems. That's the way the law reads. Because Ms. Griffith had pre-existing injuries, that surgery to 3 levels of her neck that fused it together, that meant that that part of her neck was really, really stiff. It's not going to bend. So when she gets in this collision, her head and her neck has to absorb the energy at the other levels, which puts them at greater risk of injury. So one of the things that's important to talk about is Dr. Foley explaining the eggshell person, how we find people who are at different stages of their life. We all have degenerative diseases and arthritis and disc problems, but most of us are very fortunate. We're asymptomatic, and we don't have a problem that's bothering us. Jeanette Griffith was pretty fortunate because for about 2 years before this motor vehicle crash, she wasn't taking any medications other than over-the-counter stuff. Sure, she had headaches. She had some neck pain. But she was getting along great. She was working at Terminex and making a good living. Fred Lee said she was one of the best salespeople that he ever had. So Dr. Foley explained an eggshell person is just like that. You know, if the person in Jeanette Griffith's car was, you know, a tough football player, we wouldn't be here. But it was a person who had a very delicate neck and spine before the collision happened. And remember what Dr. Prive said. He said, you know, it's like someone standing on the edge of the Grand Canyon. Everything looks fine until someone bumps them. And that's what happened. Jeanette Griffith got bumped, and it caused her this never-ending fall, which I think is important. And, you know, it's very difficult for us all to sit here and watch all that surveillance yesterday. But the key part was it's important to see the change in Jeanette Griffith's life over time. You know, they wanted to show you just 2010, but then it's important to see 2011 and 2012. And what happened is you got to see 2014, how Ms. Griffith is now, and the problems that she has to deal with. We're all familiar with common sense. A chain is only as strong as its weakest link. And even Dr. Herman, the workers' compensation doctor, agreed with that. One thing that is important to consider is what objective proof do we have of injury in this case? And, you know, all the doctors said that, yeah, you can have a clear MRI, but still a person can have a permanent injury. And an MRI tends to focus on the discs and the spinal canal and the nerves that we can see. But Dr. Foley said, look, let me show you this MRI, and I can show you where the inflammation is that the neurosurgeon was talking about, right at the edge of the disc, where the nerve and the disc are irritating each other. She has constant inflammation and swelling. We call it a hot neck. Every day of her life, every time she turns her head, every time she moves around, every time she jostles herself, you know, she irritates that spinal cord. And I think every doctor here that talked about the spinal cord being touched and irritated explained that it doesn't like to be touched. That's why it's designed to float in the spinal fluid in the middle. But when we have pre-existing conditions such as the osteoarthritis and the bones start encroaching in there, then the spinal cord is much closer and it gets irritated very easily. And it manifests itself in this constant neck pain and the constant headaches. And then the lumbar spine, same thing, shooting down her leg and causing her to be cane. Dr. Harper, the orthopedic spine surgeon who came in here, who paid for $25,000 to work in this case, he said, look, I'm going to treat patients like this. You know, I'm a surgeon, I just do that. The neurosurgeon said, yeah, I'll treat anybody who walks in my door, but, you know, I'm going to order physical therapy, chiropractic care, and pain management. Everything exactly that Danette Griffith has gotten. And I asked him, I said, doctor, are you saying that any of the care and the treatment that Ms. Griffith got was unnecessary? He said, no. He didn't disagree with any of the treatment at all. So one of the things you're going to look at in the verdict form is the past medical bills. And one of the exhibits you're going to have is a summary, a list, a page of every single bill, and behind it is the medical bill. And it comes to over $221,000. You don't have that, so it'll be easy. One of the innuendos in this case, if someone says, hey, you know, how come Mrs. Griffith only told her doctors about one crash? You know, and that's not really what happened. I think if you look at all the records, she was really clear. She made sure every single doctor knew about the 1999 accident where she was a pedestrian. She's walking to the air show, she gets hit by the car, and ends up under the scalpel of Dr. Shugart, who does the fusion. Then in 2002, she has a minor car crash. And you know what? They're concerned about her every time she has an accident because of the extra risk factor she has because of the cervical spine and the way it's been fused. So if it was just, you know, a healthy, perfectly fine lady who had a car accident, they'd probably say, how you feeling? Everything okay? You know, okay. But with her, they're like, you know what? That plate in your neck may have gotten loose. It may have cracked a bone somewhere in there. Or it may have herniated the disc above because we know that the force has to go somewhere. So let's run a few extra tests. Let's do a CT and let's do an MRI. And that was good medicine that the doctors practiced each time. And so she went to her chiropractor and they took care of her and they did the manipulation to keep her range of motion good. So she said she could drive a car and that when they did that one procedure to her neck, afterwards she could look over her shoulders and drive much more safely. But after every one of those 2002, 2004, and 2005 conditions, her condition stabilized and she got back to her plateau again. And all of those conditions increase the value or the risk of damages that Danette Griffith is going to have. Because rather than just having one pre-existing condition, she really has a second one, and then a third one, and a fourth one. When you add that all together, that makes her really delicate. And I think that, as Dr. Prive said, she's really standing on the edge of the Grand Canyon. And it just takes that bump of 8.5 miles an hour or 6,000 pounds at a tenth of a second to cause that fall that she went through. So when Danette's going to her doctors, she tells everyone about the 1999 accident and the surgery in 2000. But the 2002, 2004, 2005, she tells the doctors that she's treating with that know about it, but it's not a really big deal because it came back to normal. She didn't have to have a big surgery. Nothing really significant had changed in her life. One of the other things that came up in this case is subsequent falls or injuries. And in this case, she talked about the evidence was that there were some falls afterwards, falling out of a chair or walking with her dog. And you can see from the surveillance her lack of stability. I mean, she's using a cane, her neck is having these problems, and she's gyrating around. That's probably causing some balance disturbances. And that comes up under intervening cause. It's like she wouldn't be on the medication, she wouldn't be using the cane, she wouldn't be having these neck problems, but for the motor vehicle crash. And these problems that she'd have make her unstable and lead her into a situation where it's hard for her to walk and ambulate. We call it the antalgic gait. Narcotics and drugs, that word is kind of thrown around here a little bit. And I think it's important for everyone to realize that she followed every single one of her doctor's medication prescription orders right to the letter as close as she could. Dr. Privé said, she deviated a little bit, and she begged for forgiveness and brought it back. But he ran a drug test on her, checked her, made sure she took the medication, and he maintained her health at the highest level possible. I think it was the neurosurgeon who said, there's two types of pain. One where we can see where it is, and we can go in with a knife, and we can cut the bone away, and we can pull it off the nerve and stop it. And then the other one, we have to treat the symptoms. And as he said, chiropractic care and pain management. And fortunately, Danette Griffith has been under the care of very good pain management doctors the whole way. Dr. Privé, triple board certified, and Dr. Brian James, who was the second video deposition that you saw, who talks about how he checks with the Florida State record to make sure she's not getting medication from any other source or doctor. He gives her the drug tests to make sure that she's taking them and that she's not taking anything else. And that whenever they give her Dilaudid, it really, really, really was a bad medication, and he did his best to get her off, and he's weaned down the medication to the lowest level as possible. But he said it's sort of like a car with different moving parts, and if you're missing a part, such as the TENS unit or the aquatherapy or the home stretching or the cervical traction brace or the lumbar brace, that it doesn't work. But when you put it all together, it fits together nicely, and that gives her the highest quality of life that she can have. And without those things, she's going to deteriorate and fall apart. One thing that was interesting is important, and you're going to deal with that on the verdict form. Here's a picture of the verdict form. Zoom in a little bit. The first question is medical expenses, and you'll have that. It's $221,000. Talk about the medical expenses to be incurred in the future. When you talk about that, remember what Dr. Privé said. He goes, look, we're going to keep her on the same medication. We'll look at the bills from Dr. Brian James about how much it costs every month for her to go in and get treated. And you're going to also have this big stack of the prescriptions, and you can see the cost of these medications. They're very simple. They're going to continue on a monthly basis. But Dr. Privé said, you know what, we're going to do this radiofrequency thermal ablation, where they stick a small probe, a needle, into the spine, and they get it right next to the one nerve that causes pain. And he says we can heat it up and kill the nerve, and that will stop the cycle of pain. But he goes, that's a sympathetic nerve, and it will grow back over time, unlike the type of nerves that control our muscles. So he said every 1.5 years it's going to be $4,000 or $5,000. He said the other thing we could do is we could do a spinal stimulator, which the neurosurgeon says he used to do that, but now he defers that to pain management doctors. We could install that, and I know you guys are writing down the cost of that. And then the next thing is the morphine pump. Now, if Danette Griffith is fortunate, one of those things will work. If she's unfortunate, then maybe two things will work. And if she's unfortunate, maybe she needs all three. What's interesting is that we have to consider who should bear the risk for that in the future. Should it be Danette Griffith, the lady who the court has determined, as a matter of law, did not do anything wrong, determined that the defense is at fault and caused injuries. So when it comes to the future medical care, you can add that up, exactly what it is, and you write that down. Now let's talk about the lost earnings in the past. And we put in her Social Security records, they're in there, and her income tax records are there as well. And I'll tell you, they're not really fabulous, great. It's not our strongest exhibit, but we're putting it in so that you know that, hey, she was a hard worker, she was a wage earner, she worked with her husband, and then when she's on her own, she had a lot of different sales jobs. And Terminix was very, very, very happy with her. They were grateful for her. She was doing a tremendous job. And they said, hey, guaranteed she was going to make $2,000 a month. So we know that the lease was $24,000 a month. But she was doing as well as her top salesman, so she was making, or could have made, $50,000 a year. That's not an extremely high amount of money, but to her, that's a big deal. And she was a hard worker, motivated to do that. And in fact, after the Terminix job ended, they put her on part-time. She tried to get back into work, and in the surveillance, you saw her where she's dressed up and wearing a clipboard. And I submit to you that that's when she was trying to sell sales. She was doing advertising sales. And she was out there trying to make money and get back into the cycle of business, paying for things. So she did earn some money between the car crash and now, and you can calculate what you think is the fair amount of the lost wages in the past. And then the next thing gets back into the future wages in the future, or loss of earning capacity. And I think every single doctor has testified that she is not able to hold a job. Between the physical problems and the medication and the memory and the communication skills, her earning capacity has gone. And she's a pretty hard-working lady. She's pretty tough, She likes to work in a man's job. Terminix is a pretty physical job, crawling up in attics, crawling through crawl spaces in homes. So the loss of future earning capacity in this case should be somewhere between $24,000 and $50,000 a year. And think about how long people work these days. More people are working later and longer in life. If you're fortunate enough to be able to retire at 65, that's a great thing. Not everybody can do that. So when you hear that she was a low-income earner, keep in mind that she was really finding her way, and she was doing really well with Terminix. One of the things that may come up when you're back at delivering is, well, you know what? She was really messed up because of, 2000 when she had this big surgery by Dr. Shugart. But just remind each other, hey, you know what? She was working pretty hard. She was doing things. She moved to Florida. She was very active. Those are important things to consider. Shugart said that if she was hurt in 2002 or 2004 and 2005, these were all conditions which pre-existed the 2007 motor vehicle crash, and that they were all added together to be aggravated, so I added them all up. So that's what took a great risk for that. You saw the videos, and you could see when she was riding a lawnmower how her neck jerked, and you could see when she was in 2011, and you saw her in court. That's a totally involuntary physical thing to her neck that she cannot control. She never had a problem like that before. And I think that the surveillance is helpful because it shows you that over time she's just continued to deteriorate. And unfortunately, as the neurosurgeon said, unless we know where to cut and fix it, there's no objective place to go and fix it. We just have to treat the symptoms. And treating the symptoms for her was pain management, continued physical therapy, that sort of thing. Another thing that's important is a lot of the doctors talked about most people heal in, from 1 week to 6 months, I guess. I don't remember that. You probably do better than I do. But every doctor said, you know what, that is most people. There is the people that aren't in that category. There's the few exceptions who fall outside. They're the miserable minority. And Unfortunately, Danette Griffith falls into that category. She is miserable, and no matter what all the doctors do, despite all the best care that she can get, she's just not getting better. So the fact that most people heal in 9 months, talk to each other about that and say, you know what, there's always those few people who don't. What are we going to do with them? You know, most people get killed. You know, if you have a car crash, 60 miles an hour into a tree, most people get killed. But we don't bury the survivors, the lucky ones who survive that kind of crash. So we shouldn't ignore the people that have the bad result from the minor crash. One of the other things that you may discuss amongst yourself as well, you know, there's the innuendo, the causation of this is only based upon what Danette Griffith has said. But remember the objective evidence of Dr. Foley, who came in here and showed us on the MRI, where even just a few months ago when they did the film, she still has this inflammation and water and fluid and irritation in her spine. And every time she moves around, it just inflames the whole neck. She has a hot neck. We know from Dr. Herman, the workers' compensation doctor, he said, look, we palpate the back, and I can feel her knots, and those are involuntary. These are objective signs of problems. There's lots of objective signs of the problems. The way her neck moves in that unfortunate situation. The fact that she can't walk normal. There's a lot of talk about the MRI showed degeneration and stenosis, which is tightening. Well, those again are pre-existing factors that lead to aggravation when you're in a motor vehicle crash. So the fact that she has a tough MRI and her neck is different than most of ours, it makes sense that it's easier to hurt her. One of the issues is, well, is this all subjective? And it's really not all subjective. We have a lot of objective signs. I think we just covered that. I think it's really important when they talk about one of the best witnesses is Fred Lee, her employer at Turner's. But there's no stake in the outcome. He shows up because, hey, you know what? I hired her. I watched her go through training. She did a great job. She was doing tremendous. When she got hurt, we said, look, do what you got to do. Call the police. Go to our doctors. And then he said, he comes back and he sees her after a couple of weeks and he asks her, what are you doing here? You should be in bed. That guy he's not getting paid to come in here and talk to anyone. He's just telling you like it is. He doesn't even work for Terminix anymore. Iris Eastman, the lady who was her neighbor, you know, runs the animal shelter, said, let me tell you about Danette. You know, she was a great neighbor. Always, we'd go to the beach together, we'd go to the boat show together, we'd go to the comedy club together, we'd walk a lot, walk our dogs, and Danette was a great cook. Remind each other, well, how has this affected her life? Think about the Meals on Wheels and the fact that she's really isolated and stuck in her home. I think Dr. Foley explained the best way to look at someone, whether they're injured, is to look at all the records and see that when do the symptoms change? When do the patient's symptoms really change? What is the clinical correlation? And you put that together with the objective finding of the MRI. James Eubanks is another important witness to remind each other about. The nice guy who said, look, she was a very hard worker, used to go to church a lot, used to socialize, was friends with my wife, and all that stuff has changed. So that is some of the issues that if it comes up in the deliberations, that's what I want you to consider talking about. Another thing is there's things that are inside the box and there are things that are outside the box. And one of the jury instructions that the judge is going to give you in a minute is that you're not to allow sympathy to guide your verdict. Of course you can feel sympathy, but you can't use it to decide how much compensation should be, because sympathy is outside the box. And there's a couple of other things that you cannot use sympathy for. And then it's outside the box to concern yourself with, well, how will Mr. Baptiste pay for this? If someone brings that up, you say, look, that's outside the box. All that's inside the box, all the court is asked all the jury is asked to do is to measure the harms and losses and determine an amount. How it will be paid is sympathy, and that's outside the box. How she feels and how her life is, we're not here for sympathy. We're here to make up for the harms and the losses. I'm going to go over that in a little bit. If someone back there says, I'm just not sure about something, then remind them, no one's going to be sure. You're going to have lots of doubts of all kinds of things. All you have to be is more likely right than wrong on any issue. There's no, I'm just not convinced. If someone says that, you have to say, wait a second. There is no convincing. That's not the standard. It's just more likely right than wrong. Just more likely right than wrong. And when we talked about this in Board I, you're all agreed, hey, that's the burden. In fact, the greater weight standard, find the page. Greater weight of the evidence means the more persuasive and convincing force effect of the entire evidence in the case. And that's what I've been talking about. More likely right than wrong. That's exactly what it is. So if someone says, well, I'm just not convinced, say, well, that's not the burden in this case. You have to follow the rules that the court's given us. And so if you believe that it's more likely right than wrong, then you have to decide on that issue that way. Even the defense attorney and the judge is going to tell you that that's the standard right there. The more persuasive and convincing force, which means just more likely right than wrong. Now, let's go through. Here we are in a jury trial, 7 years after the collision was happened. And that's a long time. And one of the great things about our jury system is it brings finality to things for everybody. For Mr. Baptiste, for Ms. Griffin, for everybody. And you guys have to decide on a lot of issues. And one of the important issues is that your verdict will be written down, it'll be recorded, it'll be in the books, and it's going to say a lot about how you guys feel about people who violated safety rules. And you guys have a choice. I mean, you can give them a pass. And if you give them a pass, that'll be written down, and that'll be forever preserved. Or you can say, you know what? Our rules are important to us. And when a rule gets violated, even though it's not on purpose, when something's broken, when you make a mess, you have to clean it up. That's what this is about. So we're talking about the harms and the losses that we have to make up for today. Now, it's perfectly fine to come in here and defend yourself and hire experts and physics guys and doctors and do surveillance. But you also have the, if you are at fault, you also have the responsibility to make up for the difference. And that's why a jury system is so important. That's why we're the only country in the world that has the jury system. Because no one has any extra power. It's not like lobbyists or the government. Now, I want to talk about a confusing word that the law uses, and that is award. And on your verdict, it says award. Award, this is not a prize. It's a word that's not really used in the legal system. Award means to make up for, to measure the amount of compensation. Danette Griffith, if when you give her all of the past wages, and past medical bills, and the future earning capacity, that's just making up for where she is. And we're going to move on to the permanent injury stuff, which is this part of the verdict, question 3. What is the total amount of damages to pain, suffering, and that sort of thing? So what we're going to do is this is the list of things. Bodily injury. Bodily injury is the first part. And basically what it says is any injury And it can be from the most minor thing to the biggest thing. And you can see the injuries. I mean, from neck pain, headaches, arm pain, numbness, weakness, back pain, can't sleep, back hurts, walking problems, incontinence. So each one of those is entitled to be compensated for. And so when you're back there and you're talking about that, think about how these injuries affect her every day of her life, every hour. When we talk about resulting pain, if there was a machine in her house, like an ATM, that she could walk up and say, stick $10 in it and get 1 hour of relief from all her pain, you think she'd stick that $10 in there? And, wow, this is what it's like to not have pain for 1 hour. And imagine what's going through her head 59 minutes into it. She's like, wow, can I get another $10 and stick it back in the machine? So this is the type of thing that you think, what is fair? What would she pay to get out of that? And so, pain is going to the dentist and having them drill in your teeth. Suffering is knowing that tomorrow you've got to come back and do more. And would she gladly pay $10 an hour to stop the suffering? To not have to worry about that? Disability or physical impairment. How much is that worth to her every hour to not have to be able to use a cane? To be able to walk like a 47-year-old person, not like a 95-year-old person who's all decrepit and beat up and has to use a cane and is unstable. She wears the collar when she's a passenger in the car, just in case she gets into another collision, to keep her from having a worse problem. And then she takes it off because it's really pretty hot. It wears on, it's uncomfortable, so when you're standing around, you take it off. How much would she pay to never have to use that thing again? Would she pay $1 an hour for that? Disfigurement, she's fortunate in the way that she's not scarred, except she's lost so much weight. And she's lost her youth. She's lost her vitality. She's lost her muscle. Would she gladly pay $10 an hour to just magically be back to where she was 5 minutes before this crash happened? Every hour she'd stand there and say, I'd like to fix that. Mental anguish. How much is it worth per hour for her to not have to worry about, wow, am I going to have to go to the doctor's tomorrow? Wow, am I going to have to get my prescriptions refilled? Wow, am I going to be able to walk around my house and take care of my dog? Can I go out and cut my grass? Can I take care of the things I want to do? Inconvenience, $10 an hour, that's very, very, very inexpensive. Thinking about she's lost her ability to drive her car. Her mental anguish, she sits in her home all alone. Her social circles have really diminished greatly. She texts people, calls people on her cell phone. She just can't get up and walk outside and go to her neighbor's house and hang out. People aren't coming by and spending a lot of time with her. And that goes to the loss of the capacity for the enjoyment of life. $10 an hour reasonable for that? She'd gladly be seeing it and she'd say, hey, can I have another $10? I would love to be able to be happy and go do these things and hang out with my family and my friends. Aggravation of a pre-existing condition, that's pretty clear. We've talked about how her pre-existing conditions were aggravated, how that made her a nutshell. If you find that they caused any bodily injury and that resulted in any aggravation, then you're to award for that. And I think in the opening statements, I said, there's things that happened to her before, and there's things that happened to her after. And we're not asking you to award the things that happened before. And what's really nice about the law is it kind of addresses that. And you'll have it in the jury instruction, because it basically says that if you can separate it, please do so. And if you cannot separate it, it's just too hard to separate it, then just leave it all in there, because it should not go to hurt the plaintiff. The risk should be borne by the person who caused the problem. There we go. We should attempt to decide what portion of the necrosis condition result from the aggravation. If you can make that determination, then you should only award those damages. And if you can't make that determination, or if it can't be said that it would have existed apart, then you should award her for the entire condition. And that's basically all her medical bills, all her lost wages, all the pain, all the suffering, all the aggravation, all the problems that she experiences. It's important to remember that this is Danette Griffith's only day in court, as it is Mr. Baptiste. When this case is over and your verdict is filled out, that is the end of it. She can't come back in 5 years or 10 years or 20 years and say, you know what, I didn't get enough, I need more, and here's the proof. It's just over. That's the way our legal system works. So when you go back there and you consider filling out the verdict, there's two parts about the damages for pain, suffering, disability, impairment, disfigurement. And you have to decide what's fair for the past 7 years. And then you have to decide what's fair for the future, for the next 35 years, 30 years. That's what you have to measure and choose. And, you know, the damages on the first page, most of that really just goes to other people. They goes to pay the doctors, to pay her what she would have earned if she had been able to keep her job, and what she would have earned if she wasn't injured. All that money really kind of goes to other people. It's like, you know, the mortgage and just the bills that we have in life. This is the only part that makes up for the harms and losses. I mean, to hurt someone and just say, okay, well, we're going to just pay all your economic losses, but too bad, you'll just have to suffer. The law does not permit that. And when it comes to talking about permanent injury, it's clear that she is never getting any better. All the doctors agree. She is at a point that it's just not getting better. And all they're hoping to do is keep her stable. You know, if they can do other things miraculously with medicine to improve the quality of life, that'll happen. But right now, they're doing everything they can. I want to talk a little bit about Dr. Herman, her workers' compensation doctor. You remember, that's the doctor who said, you know what? Normal MRI still have a permanent injury. Normal EMG still have a permanent injury. He was being pushed around and dictated by what to do by the emails from the workers' compensation carrier that were sending emails at the same time to Danette Griffith's employer, and they were telling her, yeah, they're going to do this, they're going to do this, they're going to do this. So poor Dr. Herman is unfortunately sort of the spokesperson for the workers' compensation carrier. And so it's not surprising that they said, look, you've got to get her back to work. Tell her that she just needs home exercises and over-the-counter medications so we can stop paying these bills. We don't want to pay any lost wages or medical expenses. So do that. And if you don't do that, you know, we're probably not going to send you a lot more patients. So, you know, you decide. So Dr. Herman says, you know what, you can go back to work. But he agreed that she was a person who was more easily injured than anyone else. He agreed she could have permanent injuries and have these problems. He agreed that he hasn't seen her for 6.5 years, and he didn't know her conditions today. You know, the jury system in the United States is the greatest in the world, and the rules of citizenship in America are that, you know, we've got our government, but then we also have the jury to protect our rights. And we as lawyers in court, we stand up for you guys because you are the judge in this case, and it's a sign of respect. And I can tell you that you guys have done a great job of following your rules. You know, we can't talk to you in the hallway, we do different things. And it's somewhat of an abstract environment we've been in. But the evidence in this case has been much more right than wrong. It's been very clear and compelling evidence. I mean, there wasn't one defense doctor that said any of the treatment was wrong or the bills were too high. All of this, and the court has found as a matter of law that causation is a matter. And so your job is to go back there and fill out the verdict form unanimously, all staying in the box, leaving sympathy out, and only focusing on evidence and the law that the court has told you. And we thank you very much for your time.
All right, thank you. Thank you.
May it please the court?
You may proceed.
Mr. Soft, Ron.
How you doing? Leave it alone if you would, please.
Please.
This case has always been about what did this accident that we're here for, the June 6, 2007 accident, what sort of injury did it actually cause to Miss Griffith? Now, first of all, we start off, and we've talked about this, what kind of accident was this? And it is compelling that there is no property damage found at all whatsoever on Danette Griffith's Cadillac. Now she showed you with her finger, she thought that there was some damage. Dr. Ibser found no property damage whatsoever on this Cadillac. And you can see from yourself, there's no damage, no property damage to this Cadillac from my client backing into it. There's no property damage to Dr. Baptiste's vehicle. Zero. Nothing. Now, Dr. Ibser spoke to you about the accident and tried to give you an idea about what sort of speeds were involved in an accident like this. And he determined through his calculations based on his crush analysis, which determines, well, what would the crush damage be to a bumper if there was nothing? And he has to start at that point. And that point is a very conservative point, and that was 8.5 miles per hour. And he let you know that Mr. Baptiste at the most was backing up 8.5 miles per hour and backed into the front of Miss Griffith's Cadillac, causing zero property damage. He explained to you how the bumpers would go in and then come back out. And he let you know that was an accident that was an 8.5 miles per hour accident. And I think you all have common sense, having gone through the parking lots of the shopping centers we always go through, and you understand what the speeds are like when you've been driving a car, and you can understand.
The golden rule, Your Honor.
All right, rephrase your argument.
This was nothing more than just like a backing up in a parking lot. That's what it was like. Now, Ms. Griffith would like you to believe that Mr. Baptiste somehow got stuck on the median and revved his engine so that he then went backwards with such force that it knocked into her vehicle, causing all this damage to her car. Dr. Baptiste has been here for the whole trial. He's been listening intently, and he got up on the stand and he showed you and told you that he had backed up, or he had gone out, went to turn left a little bit, got a tire up onto the median, and then backed off. And he backed off at a regular speed, which would be comporting with what Dr. Ibser said was about 8.5 miles per hour, which ended up causing no property damage. Now, the injuries coming from this accident are shown not only from the low impact nature of the accident, using your common sense, using the information that Dr. Ipser gave you, but also from the experts that we've retained and that have spoken to you about the accident. And what would the injuries be from an accident like this accident that we're here for? And these experts put together all the medical information. It's in these evidence books here for you to look at. And they looked at the entire circumstances of Ms. Griffith's life, going back into Indiana in 1999 when she had her pedestrian accident and had the cervical fusion. They looked at the December 24th, 2002 accident in which she was hit from behind and had neck, mid-back, and low back pain. They looked at the September 27th, 2004 accident in which driving the same Cadillac rear-ended another vehicle. And she was injured in each of these accidents and received medical treatment for these accidents. And she reported to her doctors, as you'll see, Brand Regal is one to look at, how her injuries were pretty severe from these, and she was hurt from those. And she also had an accident in 2005 in which she slipped and fell and reported to the doctor's hospital that she landed on her lumbar spine. Now, this information, other than the 1999 pedestrian accident, wasn't related to her treating doctors that were treating her for this accident. They only knew about the 1999 accident. Well, it's important to understand a person's history and what has made them injured in the past and where they would be when they came into you and from what. As far as damages, as far as injuries, it's important to know what's happened to a person before the accident and after the accident. Dr. James admitted that she had some prior neck and back issues before this accident. And so we have a person that has these neck and back issues that are going on continuously over the years from the time that she comes down here to Sarasota, and she starts treating with Dr. Dietz in 2002, and she at that time had mid-back, low back, and neck pain, and she got chiropractic manipulation under anesthesia from him for these accidents that happened before our accident. And when this accident happened, Danette Griffith, she wasn't just a person that had nothing going on with her as far as not feeling good, not having pains and aches. She reported that to her doctors, just what she had going on with her. Now, that's important to know because Danette Griffith, at a certain point after this accident, goes back to what's called the baseline condition, the doctors will tell us. And she's gone back to that point and plateaued to the point where she was before our accident. But what did this accident actually cause? Well, this accident caused the myofascial muscle strain type of injuries, and that is shown to you by Dr. Harper. Dr. Harper is a board-certified orthopedic surgeon. You saw him on the stand. He said he doesn't usually do these sorts of things. He reviewed the records. He looked at her history. He did a physical examination of her, and he found that essentially her her physical examination was normal. He couldn't find any objective findings to show that she had any permanent injuries. And what he found was that she had muscle spasms associated with this accident. And he opined that she would get better within several months to a year. And that's a common thing for these type of accidents. Now, he disagreed that Ms. Griffith is an eggshell type of a plaintiff because she has this cervical fusion with a titanium plate. He did not believe that. And he said that that's not supported by just because somebody has that sort of fusion. And that is shown to you also in all of the MRIs that have been taken over the years. You have a lot of MRIs to look at and consider that have been taken over the years of the neck, the mid-back, and the back. And Danette Griffith, from the point that she started having her problems following the pedestrian accident, has had degenerative processes going on with her neck and her lumbar spine. And they have been taking MRI films of her for years and years and years before our accident, and they move along, they essentially are unchanged. And then we get to the MRI that Dr. Foley looked at, and it's not any different than the MRIs that came before, or the MRIs that came after. There's degenerative changes that have been going on with her spine over all these years. There's no objective finding of trauma to her neck, thoracic, or mid-back from the MRI films. And Dr. Foley, he told you as well that just from that, looking at that one MRI film, there's no way to determine that this accident of June 6, 2007 was the cause of those findings on that MRI film. He said he could not do that. Now, Dr. Schumacher was just here. You remember him, of course, and Dr. Schumacher is a neurosurgeon. And Dr. Schumacher as well did an extensive, you just heard, review of her records. And he did not find that she was permanently injured as well from this accident. He found that she had these myofascial sprain strain type of injuries. And he related to you that ordinarily people recover within several months from an injury like this. And that's what you would expect for Ms. Griffith as well in this accident, from this accident. Now, he didn't see any evidence of trauma or anatomic disruption on the MRI films either. Now, there's been a lot made of Dr. Herman because he's a workers' compensation doctor. Dr. Herman began treating Ms. Griffith after the accident, shortly after the accident. It is shown, though, that she did go to Doctor's Hospital right after the accident and had some Dilaudid, and then started her Dilaudid at that point. Dr. Herman examined her. She went through physical therapy. He kept coming in and seeing her. He gave her some medications, and she kept getting better and better and kept getting better. And then she got to a point where he felt that the PT for this accident wasn't related anymore. And she was at what that baseline condition was. And he didn't find any permanent injuries. He didn't find any acute disc herniations or major traumas from this accident. He said that she was able to return to work and resume full activities, and that she would have gone back to that baseline condition before the accident. Now, Dr. Herman, when he was asked about well, what about the weakest link? And referring to her neck. But he didn't find that she had a weakest link either. And he found that she had made a good recovery, that she had myofascial injuries, which are injuries to the muscles in the neck, mid-back, and the back, and that she would have recovered in a period of time for this accident. And she was returned to work. Now, Ms. Griffith decided to, for whatever reasons, not to work anymore with Terminex. She kept going to these pain management doctors and progressively kept getting more and more and more narcotics as the years went by. And it's the progressive use of the narcotics that show that she is deteriorating. And then you put that together with the subsequent fall downs, and those are important to look at. By November 20th, 2007, her gait was normal, and she had made a good recovery from the accident, according to Dr. Herman. Okay? So then after that, she was dismissed from workers' comp, supposed to go back to work, but then she has these fall downs. And the first one is when she presented to Sarasota Memorial Hospital, stating that she tripped and fell, onto her lower lumbar back. And they gave her an IV of Dilaudid. And that was September the 14th, 2011. Now, the fall down in the bathroom, that seems to be a pretty serious thing. A fall down where you fall on your back, and they give you Dilaudid. Now that's no small injury. That's no just a little bump, where you got a bruise or something. They're giving her Dilaudid. The fall down in the bathroom is not related to this accident. It's because she fell in the bathroom. There's nothing to support that this accident was in a continuous natural sequence with falling in a bathroom. And at that time, she's treating with Dr. Creve as well. So you heard Dr. Creve testify, and he told you that he had to actually dismiss her as a client for non-compliance of his protocols because of THC. And then you remember I showed him the non-compliance form, the radar form, which showed that there was inconsistencies in the use of various narcotics at the time, and he said, well, that was because his staff had written things down the wrong way, and he cross-checked it, and it was okay. Well, he was prescribing her narcotic medications at the same time that she's having these fall-down accidents and getting more narcotic medications and getting these IVs of Dilaudid. The next fall was another fall-down accident. And it was August the 30th, 2011. She reported to Sarasota Memorial Hospital that she fell in the bathroom. And she told the hospital at that time that she was dismissed by her pain management doctor and wanted refills on her medications. And at the same time, telling them about, well, I fell in the bathroom and I'm in a lot of pain. Again, they give her Dilaudid. Well, she She finally gets to Dr. James, and Dr. James is treating her currently with pain medications. And we get up to the point of November the 18th, 2011. She reported to Sarasota Memorial Hospital that her dogs pulled the chair out from underneath her, landing on her right hip. And she was unable to ambulate since then, and has had chronic pain, and the pain was off the charts. Again, here's another fall down incident, this time caused by some dogs pulling her off the chair and then falling onto the ground, hurting herself enough so that they give her Dilaudid. We've got these three subsequent fall down accidents that are serious enough for a hospital to believe that they're serious enough to give her Dilaudid for the pain. Now these fall downs are not in a natural sequence going along with this accident that we're here for. The accident with Dr. Baptiste did not cause her to report to Sarasota Memorial Hospital and have these Dilaudid IVs. Her continued treatment with Dr. James for pain management, I don't think any doctor here is saying that it's not indicated, that it's not needed. But you heard Dr. Schumacher today say that, you know, there's reasons that people have pain, and some of those reasons could be reasons for, like the reason from our accident that was an objective kind of finding where you have a sprained strain and you get better, or it could be for different reasons that the records are showing you that she is treating for now that are for other reasons. And I submit to you that the use of narcotics is a driving force in her life right now. That is what is pushing her off the edge, not this auto accident. Now, July the 10th, 2012, she presented to Sarasota Memorial Hospital for acute narcotic withdrawal. Now, that says a lot right there. The condition of Miss Griffith at this time is not due to this accident with Mr. Baptiste back in 2007. It's because of her continued use of narcotic medication and whatever else is going on with her, but it's not because of these sprain myofascial injuries that happened and which had resolved. Now, Dr. Harper told you they had resolved. Dr. Herman has told you they resolved. Dr. Shoemaker told you they had resolved. And they tell you that the time period for something like this, and this is important because if she has these prior problems that we see from her long history that she does, and she has the neck pain, the back pain, she reports to her doctor that she's had chronic pain in her neck and her back. Dr. James even reported that at the time of the accident, she was having these neck and back pain, upper extremity problems. Well, what happened after that baseline period? She got injured from this accident. She had the sprain strain type of injuries, and she would have recovered easily within the period Dr. Herman said she did, but certainly within a period of time, within 6 months or so, it's been said. I think Dr. Prive said within a year, strains ordinarily would heal themselves. And then after that, you've got these other issues going on which aren't a result of this accident, the narcotic usage. So when you look at the verdict form and you decide, well, what should we compensate her for fairly for this accident? What is fair compensation for this accident? It would be that period of time where her doctor said she would have been better by within, Dr. Prive said, a year. Well, it's important to see that all along there's no objective findings. No doctor's finding any objective findings of trauma. It always comes from Danette Griffith, what she's telling people is wrong with her. And the MRIs are saying there's no trauma related that's of a serious permanent injury type. The EMG, the NCV studies as well show you there's no permanent injury type that would be radicular in nature of the upper extremities or the lower extremities. The surveillance, I think, is very telling. You sat through that for a long time yesterday, and what we have is Ms. Griffith, by March and April of 2010, going about her life in an ordinary way, it appears, doing things that she said she couldn't do, telling us that she couldn't do, and we see her mowing her yard, working on her car, and then shelling at the beach, bending over, full range of motion, squatting down, arms overhead. This full range of motion, no apparent distress or discomfort, and this is back in 2010. And the before and after witnesses, Frederick Lee, James Eubanks, and Iris Eastman, when I asked them, well, what was she like in 2010? How was she? And they reported she was devastated. She was just emaciated and horrible in her lifestyle and the way she was getting along, couldn't do anything. That's the Danette Griffith that would present to you today, it seems. But back in 2010, she was getting along pretty good, it looked like. She was actually doing the things that she said she couldn't do. The fall downs, they've happened in 2011. The increased use of Dilaudid narcotics increased after 2010. She starts to go downhill at that point. It's not because of this accident. It's this accident did not cause the natural progression of Danette Griffith getting worse over time. And it's important to think about when Danette Griffith goes to her pain management doctor, whether it be Dr. Prive or Dr. James, she's telling him why she thinks she feels bad. And she's telling him, well, it's this accident. That's why. But she never gave them a full history, never allowed them to think about the other things that were going on in her life, and hasn't told them about the subsequent fall downs. You know, these other injuries, which are very serious enough to get Dilaudid injections. Now, I submit to you that PIP insurance has been paid out in this case in the amount of $10,210.10. And you can find that in the records there as well. So, ladies and gentlemen, what we have is a woman that obviously has problems. And it's up to you as the jury to take all of the evidence, the totality of the evidence, and weigh it, look at it, think about it. Think about the doctors, think about their tests, their objective tests. Think about what's gone on in this Griffith's life before and after this accident, and how our motor vehicle accident, this very minor, low impact motor vehicle accident that happened in the interim of all of this history of being in other accidents, how that fits in. And you'll find, I believe, after looking at all of the evidence, that the preponderance of the evidence will tilt over to the side of the defense and show you that this low impact, no property damage did not cause a permanent injury, and Danette Griffith had certain myofascial sprain type of injuries that would have resolved. And that's what you need to award her for her damages in this case. Thank you.
Thank you. Rebuttal.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Fisher said things to think about. One of the things to think about is, what is tomorrow going to be like when this verdict is part of the public record? They want to say Danette Griffith is like a drug seeker. They're trying to like slime the plaintiff and say she's a bad person. They also kind of say, well, she goes to the hospital and gets delighted. Let's use our common sense. You're an emergency room doctor. People come in. Some people could be drug seekers. And so they're like, oh, I'm in pain. So what do? They don't give you a bottle of pills and say, oh, I hope that makes you feel better. They go, sit right down. Let's give you an IV. Let's give it to you right here, right now. And when you're done, we take it out and you leave. They're not contributing to the drug delinquency of people. They're treating them for their pain. They're giving them the best care that they can. And they're not allowing a drug seeker who's totally faking it. And all the doctors have testified there's never been any sign of that underneath Danette Griffith's part. So, to come in here and say that it's her fault, but you have to go back and say, well, when she went to the emergency room at Doctor's Hospital 2 days after the crash, and they gave her Dilaudid, did that make her a druggie? I mean, when you look at the records from Dr. Pride, finally, he was treating her on a very ongoing basis and was treating her right during the times of all of the surveillance. They're in there, but if you want to look at Dr. Pride's records, they'll be right there. When they talk about, well, Dilaudid. I mean, let's smear her. The poor lady that has these physical problems where she can't ambulate, she can't walk, she uses a cane, she's deteriorating, and then she has problems. She goes to the hospital for treatment, and they just do what they can. They talk about where she goes through pill withdrawals or something. And there was a time, I'm sure everyone here used their common sense, when the pill mills were a big deal, and the pharmacies were being really selective, and they weren't selling them for a while. And she was a victim of that, even though she had a perfect prescription from her pain management doctors, either board certified Dr. Brian James or triple board certified Dr. Pride. Intervening cause, combination with some other natural cause occurring after the negligence. That's what this instruction is for. If you find that her balance and gait problems caused her to fall later, then you are to include all of those damages. Now, if you think, no, it's not part of it, you can cut it out. But I'll remind you that there isn't one defense witness or plaintiff's witness or any evidence in this case whatsoever to indicate that less than the full amount of the medical bill should be paid. You know what? He puts the pictures up and he says, what injury did this cause? And Dr. Ipser is an engineer, a physics expert, and he goes, look, it's an 8.5 mile an hour collision. The court has determined as a matter of law, negligence isn't an issue and neither is causation. It's not who hurt her, it's just how bad. And you have a plethora of records. We have basically 2 whole sets of records. You can go back here and look through your heart's content. You'll find out every drug she's ever taken, every medication, every time she's had any physical therapy. These records go back to 1999, all the way up till probably maybe January 15th of 2014. They'll all be there. They talk about no property damage, but they don't really want to show you the picture of the broken radiator and the fact that if the car was overheating. You know what? They want to say that manipulation under anesthesia was like this really bad thing, but do you remember Danette Griffith testifying? She said, wow, as soon as they did that, I could look completely around. I had full range of motion. It was the greatest thing that ever happened to me. And since then, she hadn't had any problems. The other thing is that if there was a really good record, a really good note, or really something in here that said, you know what, she went to the hospital. This isn't, I'm just pulling a record out. She went to the hospital 6 months before this crash, or 1 year before the crash, 18 months before the crash, or even 2 years before the crash. You say, look, this is the cause of the problem. You'd be looking at it over and over and over, as boring as the surveillance was. There's no such record because she was doing great for over 2 years before this crash happened. And if you were to somehow agree that, you know what, she does have a drug problem, you got to look at the cause of the drug problem. Was it this motor vehicle crash? That's where it started. That's where the medication started. So even if she does have a drug problem, which every pain management doctor, board certified, and says she's perfectly fine, she's doing great. But if you were to take that argument, just remind each other, well, they buy all that. They're responsible for every penny of that. And that's one more damage, addicted to medication. So they're trying to shirk their responsibility in one way for things that they may have caused. Look at, 2 years before the crash, she was doing very well. 2 months, very well. 2 weeks, doing excellent, making a living, working hard. 2 hours, 2 minutes, 2 seconds before this crash, she was doing great. And 2 days later, she's having a heart problem. They talked about the orthopedic surgeon who says he doesn't even treat these types of patients. I mean, why is he a witness here? He goes, she doesn't need surgery. I don't treat these type of people. I send them off to other people. I asked him to name the 12 cranial nerves he allegedly tested, and he could name 10 of them. He couldn't even name them all. He really didn't have his records that organized. He didn't notice when he read the records that she did have surgery to her Achilles heel. There was just a myriad of mistakes. And every time I asked him to agree on something, he would just totally polarize and say, no, I'm not agreeing with anything you say. Compare that to Dr. Foley, who's triple board certified, who he says, you know what, I'm going to tell you. I'm not here. I can't tell you causation. I'm looking at one picture. It'd be like looking at a picture of a car and saying when it got back. Well, you can't tell from the picture alone. But he said, you know what? If you look at all the medical records, all the treatment, and you ask the doctors that laid hands on her every day, hundreds of times, and said, doctor, how was she doing before the crash? She was doing really well, living her life, doing good. And then boom, the crash, what happened? you know what? Her condition changed. It went down. She has this terrible problem. It's not getting better and keeps getting worse and worse and worse. And she is a classic eggshell plaintiff. The orthopedic surgeon wouldn't even agree that she was at higher risk factor when she has 3 bones in her neck fused together. So it's important that you consider one of the important jury instructions that the court went over with, the believability of witnesses. And an expert witness, you can throw it completely out if you want. You can say, you know what, that expert didn't know what he was talking about, or he was motivated by the $25,000 he got paid. He didn't really care, and all he wanted to do was just come in here, say his thing, do what the team paid him for, and then get out and move on. You have the absolute right to discount all of that information. We'll talk about another thing. You know, Danette Griffith testified, and the evidence records are here, that she had automobile PIP insurance. And on the stand, she said, look, they paid some of my bills. Please deduct this from my past medical bills. Because she doesn't, that's what the law says, that's what you're supposed to do. But these other bills, like workers' compensation, other insurance, you don't deduct that. You know, they may have been paid, but some of them have the right to take their money back. That's why it's not deducted. And that's why the court handles that. It gets so complex, they don't even have to ask the jury to figure out all these weird combinations of what gets paid and doesn't get paid. So I share that with you. Another key thing that's really, really, really important that the judge is about to read to you is not to let bias, sympathy, prejudice, or any other sentiment affect you, because those are all outside the box. So when someone says, well, how's this going to get paid? That's outside the box. Your only job is to sit there and go through the verdict form very, very carefully, line by line, and figure out what are the harms and what are the losses that happen in that Griffith from this motor vehicle crash. You know, and they always want to say, well, most people would have healed in 6 or 8 weeks or 6 or 8 months or even a year. Even Dr. Creevy said, you know, most people do heal in a short period of time, but it's this miserable minority of people who don't. And we just don't ignore those people. Danette Griffith deserves the dignity to have proper care, to get her life back as much as possible, to get her function back as much as possible.
You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Judge. More likely right than wrong on every single issue. In fact, the court has determined on so many issues that it really is a very simple verdict form that you're going to be dealing with. You know, an analogy would be, let's say someone gets in a relatively minor motor vehicle crash. They go to the hospital, and unfortunately, the hospital makes a mistake and gives the person a medication they're highly allergic to. They just messed up. They gave the wrong patient's medicine, and they caused them to be horribly injured. Well, the law says that the person who caused the wreck is responsible for all that. And now to come in here and say, we're blaming the doctors, medical malpractice, that is ridiculous. There's no evidence of that whatsoever. In fact, their neurosurgeon said all the care and treatment she's got has been perfectly fine. Another thing that's important, you know, this narcotic thing, I guess it's just let go of it. But if that's her main motivation in life, why does she go to the doctor to get 30 Botox injections 4 times a year in her neck? Or why does she undergo this epidural steroid injections where they stick a needle in her spine and get right next to the spinal cord and inject steroids and Novocaine? I mean, these are not things that drug seekers do. And to allege that she's a drug seeker is deplorable. It's not, there's no evidence whatsoever about that. I'm grateful that they had the surveillance because it shows how her condition deteriorates. Thank you very much. We appreciate your time and attention in taking the notes and everything you've done in this case. I'm looking forward to getting this matter completely resolved and bringing justice to everyone in this room. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right,